Ran is the Japanese word for chaos. It's the perfect title to describe Kurosawa's 1985 historical epic set in 16th century Japan. Ran takes place in the middle of the Sengoku Jidai, a period of constant warfare between competing warlords and their clans for control over the country. This period of warring states was defined by terrible atrocities committed on all sides. Ran is a film about the tragedy of war. Kurosawa asks an important question: why are humans obsessed with destroying each other? Kurosawa is most famous for the films he made in the 1950s and 60s, classics like Seven Samurai, Sanjuro, and High and Low, to name a few. After decades of struggling to get his films funded, Kurosawa made a grand return to create what might just be the greatest film of all time. Kurosawa initially came up with the idea for Ran in the mid-1970s. He read the tale of Mori Motonari, a Japanese warlord whose three sons were all talented and loyal. Kurosawa's inspiration for Ran came from imagining if the three sons were instead disloyal to their father. As he began planning the outline of the story, he came across Shakespeare's King Lear, a play about a king who seeks to divide his kingdom among his three daughters. The two eldest daughters insincerely lavish their father with praise and affection, but the youngest daughter, Cordelia, refuses to do so. She understands that property is not the same as fatherly love. For this, Lear banishes her from the kingdom. His two eldest daughters then take power and leave him homeless, and he goes insane. The story for Ran then became an adaptation of King Lear. Over the course of 2.5 hours, we are told the story of Lord Hidetora Ichimonji, a 70-year-old warlord who now, in his senior years, attempts to divide his kingdom among his three sons. His eldest son, Taro, is to take his position as ruler and inherit the largest castle in the kingdom. His second son, Jiro, is given the second largest castle, and his youngest son, Saburo, is offered the third largest. But Saburo refuses and argues that if he accepts, he and his brothers will just fight until one of them becomes the sole ruler of Hidetora's kingdom. Hidetora doesn't believe Saburo and is deeply offended, so he decides to banish him from the kingdom. Upon gaining power, the eldest son Taro immediately decides to banish his own father from his castle because Hidetora wants to remain as the de facto leader until his death. But Taro forces him to cede all power to him. Because Hidetora causes friction within the castle, he is banished. He then moves to his second son's castle, but he is not allowed to bring his royal entourage because Taro has declared that Hidetora is no longer king, and therefore has no power and no status. His entourage of 15 armed men is no longer recognized as legitimate. He then moves to the third castle. Taro's forces abandon the castle to lure Hidetora and his guard there, so that he could then invade and kill him and all his forces at once. This is when the iconic castle burning scene occurs. The brutality displayed by the armies of Taro and Jiro are no different than the brutality inflicted by Hidetora himself against the many enemies he fought in the past. Hidetora believed he could be a murderous, bloodthirsty conqueror for his entire life and then retire peacefully in old age. Instead, his attempted retirement is seen as weakness, and his sons take the opportunity to overthrow him and destroy his personal guard. They sought to kill him, but ultimately they let him live, as he is the only person that survives the invasion. He walks out of the burning castle in a state of total shock. He's overwhelmed by the guilt of having been responsible for the deaths of everyone who sought to defend him. He is shocked that his sons would go to such lengths to destroy him. As he exits the castle gate, it becomes clear that he has gone totally insane. The scene of Hidetora emerging from the burning castle had to be done in one take. The shot is truly iconic. The red and yellow banners below mimic the red and yellow hues of the raging fire. Rand shows that a family can easily be divided into warring clans. These divisions lead to endless suffering. For hundreds of years, Japan was ruled by warlords who valued power above human life. Hidetora and other powerful warlords attempt to cheat death in a way by cementing their power through their descendants, though it's a fruitless endeavor. Hidetora's power and legacy is instantly undone when he transfers his power to his son. His legacy doesn't live on through Taro because Taro wants all the spotlight for himself, just as much as his father did. All people are forgotten eventually. Even Hidetora's eldest sons do not care what he has done for them. Taro and Jiro are quick to move on and forget him. All of the resulting violence is a product of greed. Power is alluring. The legacy of power is also alluring. This lust for power in the Ichimonji clan doesn't pay off for anybody. In the beginning of the film, Hidetora says that when he was a boy, endless battles covered the field below the place of his birth. He says that after 50 years of war, the plain is now peacefully under his control. His entire adult life was dedicated to cementing his power over nearby lands. Yet, after all that effort, he is still just a man. He has aged, and he will, of course, die. His two eldest sons discard him once he has transferred power to Taro, and he is left homeless, kicked out of 3 of his castles, and forced to live on the plains he fought so hard to control. Taro is killed by Jiro during their joint invasion of Hidetora's castle. Afterward, Jiro and Saburo go to war with each other. Jiro's army is mostly destroyed by Saburo's forces, but Saburo is killed by a sniper after the battle. Jiro is then killed in battle when the first castle is besieged by Saburo's ally, Ayabi. After the fighting, Hidetora and his 3 sons are all dead. Nothing remains of the Ichimonji clan. Greed led to the destruction of everything Hidetora fought for. The only tragic character in Ran is Saburo, who tried to warn his father and was punished, and ultimately killed because his father didn't heed his warning. The fate of Hidetora is not tragic because he's a terrible person who has caused immense suffering throughout his life. He personally ordered for Tsumaro to be blinded, but refers to the act as generous because he spared his life. This is because he killed the rest of his family and destroyed his castle. Hidetora is violent, cruel, and is apathetic to the suffering of others. He is a man of bloodlust, but of course, as the movie outlines, this is the nature of power, and ultimately, unfortunately, the nature of humanity itself. Saburo's right-hand man, Tango, tells the fool Kayomi not to cry over the deaths of Saburo and Hidetora, because their deaths are only a natural result of warfare. Tango laments the fact that the clan celebrates death at their hands, victory through violence. Humans are comfortable with killing each other if it benefits them. When Hidetora finds himself wandering through tall grass on a windy plain, he utters the phrase, "In a mad world, only the mad are sane." This quote really tells us how Kurosawa views war. For him, war is mad. It's nonsensical. Warlords and conquerors are mad people. But of course, throughout human history, war has remained constant. People have always fought for power, so then the world itself must be mad. Otherwise, humans will not kill each other so easily. Hidetora feels that for him to navigate a world of madness, he himself must be mad in order to be sane. This is how he justifies becoming a brutal warlord. His brutality makes sense to him because he sees the world as a brutal place. His conduct is not exceptional, it's normal, especially in Sengoku period Japan. All Hidetora has ever known is war. He was always mad. Kurosawa has an impressive list of well-made and beautiful films, but most of his films were shot in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. This is because Japanese audiences were no longer regularly watching movies in the cinema. Instead, television became more popular. Japanese cinema viewership peaked in 1958 at 1.1 billion viewers, but by 1975, this number had declined to just 200 million. For most of his career, Kurosawa would release an average of about one film a year. This came to an end in 1965 when he released Redbeard. The film was a critical and commercial success. His films were certainly still profitable, but due to Kurosawa's dedication to his craft, they were expensive and time-consuming to make, so studios were unwilling to fund more projects. Kurosawa's longtime contract with Toho Studios ended in 1966, so he decided to turn his attention to Hollywood. In the late 1960s, he worked on the American film Tora Tora Tora. The purpose of the film was to show the attack on Pearl Harbor from both the American and Japanese perspectives. Kurosawa wrote a screenplay for the Japanese perspective and was to direct the Japanese portion of the film, but his role as director only lasted 3 weeks. His American counterparts at 20th Century Fox found his directing methods strange and concluded that he was mentally ill. In Kyoto, a doctor found him to be suffering from anxiety and insomnia. Based on this, Fox kicked him off the project. Kurosawa worked on the film for 2 years, but the portion of the film he directed wasn't used, and the script was significantly revised after he was forced off the project. After this experience, it was clear to Kurosawa that he wouldn't find success in Hollywood. It also remained true that he wouldn't be able to secure funding in Japan. The once esteemed filmmaker now found himself without purpose. The film industry had no interest in him anymore. His debacle with Fox and his supposed mental illness was highly publicized, and Kurosawa wanted to quickly make another movie to restore his reputation. In 1970, Kurosawa released Dodis Kaden, a film about homeless people living on the outskirts of Tokyo. Kurosawa stated that after 1950, the content of his films reflected his emotional state. The man went from making epic samurai and crime movies to making a film about destitution. It is clear that Kurosawa felt destitute when he made this film. Dodis Kaden was significantly cheaper than his earlier films, costing less than a third of what High and Low cost to produce in 1963. Despite this, Kurosawa still needed to mortgage his house to finance the picture. Dodis Kaden ended up being a commercial failure and left Kurosawa in significant debt. His movie about destitution, unfortunately, left him even more destitute. Kurosawa reached his breaking point and attempted to commit suicide in December 1971. His attempt failed, and fortunately, his filmmaking prospects quickly improved afterwards. In 1972, Kurosawa's producer was approached by Soviet studio Mosfilm to produce an adaptation of the Russian novel Dersu Uzala. Kurosawa would be the director. I haven't seen Dersu Uzala, so I can't give a personal opinion on it. The film is by no means his most popular or most well-known film, but it generated the first positive feedback for Kurosawa in a decade, and gave him the creative confidence to continue working on films. Dersu Uzala is important because it represents a turning point for Kurosawa. He couldn't get his films financed in Japan or America, but Mosfilm accepted him with open arms and brought him back into the world of filmmaking when no other studio would. Kurosawa wrote the script for Ran in 1975, shortly after finishing Dersu Uzala, and spent the next 10 years storyboarding every shot in the film. Before becoming a filmmaker, Kurosawa was briefly a painter in the 1930s. He painted every storyboard of the film Ran in preparation for shooting. Between 1978 and 1980, he worked on his historical epic Kagemusha, which depicts the events leading up to the important Battle of Nagashino in 1575. The film would become the most expensive movie ever produced in Japan at the time. Toho Studios couldn't afford to fully fund the movie, so in 1978, Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas convinced 20th Century Fox to fund the remainder of the film's budget. A deal was made that Fox would get worldwide distribution rights for the film outside of Japan. Coppola was a big name in Hollywood after the immense success that came with directing both Godfather films, and George Lucas had just released Star Wars the year prior. It is important to note that the main inspiration for the story of Star Wars was The Hidden Fortress, a 1958 film created by none other than Akira Kurosawa. Kagemusha was a critical and commercial success, and generated enough money to partially finance Ran. To cover the whole budget, the film became a French-Japanese co-production. In later years, Kurosawa would consider Kagemusha to be a dress rehearsal for Ran. After 1965, Kurosawa was seen as old-fashioned by the film industry. They were quick to forget him, just as Hidetora's sons in Ran were quick to forget him. When Kurosawa filmed Ran, he was 75 years old. He knew he was at the end of his career. For most of his time as a filmmaker, when he was asked what his best film was, he would always say that his next one would be. After he made Ran, Kurosawa stopped saying that, and instead he said that Ran was his greatest film. He knew that Ran would be his final epic, so he made sure that it was perfect in every way. Ran is the greatest movie ever made. Kurosawa's presentation is nothing short of pure art. It's the ultimate display of filmmaking prowess. Every shot is gorgeous. With the struggles that Kurosawa faced, the development of Ran is a testament to his dedication as a filmmaker. And as always, thanks for watching.